My name is Tom McKenzie. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a cattle rancher in the Montana Territory in the year 1887. This is the story of how a simple act of kindness during a winter storm changed my life forever, leading me into a world I never knew existed and a love I never thought possible. I've been working cattle in Montana for 8 years now, ever since I left my family's farm in Ohio seeking adventure and opportunity in the American West. The McKenzie Ranch covers 3,000 acres of prime grazing land in the Judith Basin, where I raise Hereford cattle and break wild horses for the cavalry. It's hard work, but it's honest work, and I've built a reputation as a fair dealer and a man of my word. The winter of 1887 was particularly brutal. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 days, and the temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. I was riding the northern boundary of my property, checking on a herd of cattle that had been grazing in a sheltered valley, when the storm hit with a vengeance. The wind picked up suddenly, howling across the prairie like a banshee, and the snow began falling so thick I could barely see my horse's ears. I knew I was in serious trouble. This was the kind of blizzard that could kill a man in minutes if he lost his way. I was trying to find shelter when I heard something that made me pull up short, a sound like crying, barely audible over the wind. At first, I thought it might be an animal in distress, but as I listened more carefully, I realized it was human, and it was coming from a grove of cottonwood trees about 50 yards to my left. Dismounting from my horse, I tied him to a sturdy branch and pushed through the snow toward the sound. What I found there nearly broke my heart. A young Native American woman, probably no more than 18 years old, huddled against the base of a large tree. She was wearing traditional buckskin clothing, but it was soaked through from the snow, and she was shivering so violently I could hear her teeth chattering from 10 feet away. "Miss," I called out, approaching slowly with my hands visible. I'd had enough dealings with the local tribes to know that sudden movements could be misinterpreted. "Miss, are you hurt?" She looked up at me with the most beautiful dark eyes I'd ever seen, but they were filled with fear and confusion. She said something in what I recognized as Blackfoot, but I didn't understand the words. "I don't speak your language," I said gently, "but I can see you're freezing. Let me help you." Without waiting for a response, she was clearly in no condition to refuse help. I took off my heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She was so cold that I could feel the chill radiating from her body, even through the thick fabric. "We need to get you somewhere warm," I said, knowing she probably couldn't understand me, but hoping my tone would convey my intentions. "My cabin's about 2 miles from here." I helped her to her feet, and she leaned heavily against me, her legs barely able to support her weight. The hypothermia was clearly advanced, and I knew that if I didn't get her warmed up soon, she could die. Getting her onto my horse was a challenge. She was weak and disoriented, and my gelding was nervous about the storm. But eventually, I managed to get her seated in front of me. Wrapped in both my coat and a heavy blanket, I kept tied to my saddle. The ride back to my cabin was the longest 2 miles of my life. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked us off the horse several times, and the snow was falling so thick I had to rely entirely on my horse's instincts to find the way home. The young woman drifted in and out of consciousness, and I found myself talking to her constantly, partly to keep her awake and partly to keep myself calm. "Stay with me," I kept saying. "We're almost there. You're going to be fine." When we finally reached my cabin, I carried her inside and immediately set about building up the fire in my stone fireplace. The cabin was small but well built, with thick log walls and a good roof that kept out the wind and snow. I laid her on my bed, which was closest to the fireplace, and began the careful process of warming her up. I'd seen hypothermia before. It was a common danger in Montana winters, and I knew that warming someone too quickly could be as dangerous as leaving them cold. First, I removed her wet buckskin clothing, trying to be as respectful as possible, while ensuring she was completely dry. I wrapped her in every blanket and quilt I owned, then prepared warm broth from beef jerky and vegetables I had stored in my root cellar for the next several hours. I sat beside the bed, spooning small amounts of warm broth into her mouth and monitoring her breathing. Gradually, her shivering subsided, and her skin began to regain its natural color. It was near midnight when she finally opened her eyes and looked at me with full awareness. "Who are you?" she asked in heavily accented but clear English. "Surprising. Me, Tom McKenzie," I replied. "I found you in the storm. You were nearly frozen to death." She tried to sit up, then seemed to realize she was wearing only my spare shirt and blankets. A blush spread across her cheeks. "My clothes, they were soaked through. I had to get you dry and warm. Your clothes are hanging by the fire. They should be dry by morning." She nodded slowly, then looked around my cabin with curious eyes. "Why did you help me?" "Why wouldn't I? You were dying." "I am Aiyana," she said after a moment. "Aiyana Crow Feather of the Blackfoot Nation. Pleased to meet you, Miss Crow Feather, though I wish it were under better circumstances. My people, they will be looking for me. In this storm, they'd be crazy to try. Nobody should be out in weather like this." As if to emphasize my point, the wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling down the chimney to hiss in the fire. "I was gathering medicine plants," Aiyana explained. "My grandmother is sick, and she needed a particular root that only grows in the high places. The storm came faster than I expected. Medicine? Plants? Are you a healer? I am learning. My grandmother is teaching me the old ways before she— Aiyana's voice trailed off, and I could see the worry in her eyes. Well, you won't be gathering anything tonight. This storm looks like it'll blow for another day at least. Over the next few hours, as the storm raged outside, Aiyana and I talked. I learned that she was indeed 18 years old, the granddaughter of a respected medicine woman named White Dove. Her parents had died in a smallpox epidemic when she was 12, and she'd been raised by her grandmother ever since. White Dove says I have the gift, Aiyana told me. She says I can see things others cannot, feel the spirits in the plants and animals. Do you believe that? I know it is true. When I touched your hand earlier, I could feel your spirit. It is different from other white men I have known. Different how? Cleaner, kinder. You have not let the frontier make you hard inside. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I changed the subject. Tell me about your people. I've seen Blackfoot riders from a distance, but I've never really talked to any of your tribe. We are a proud people, Aiyana said. We have lived on these lands for many generations, following the buffalo, living in harmony with the spirits of the earth and sky. But things are changing. The white settlers bring new ways, and not all of them are good. I imagine it's been difficult. Some of my people want to fight, to drive all white men from our lands. Others say we must learn to live alongside you, to find a new way that honors both our traditions and your progress. What do you think? Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I think the spirits brought me to you for a reason. I think perhaps there are good white men, men who can be trusted, men who might help bridge the gap between our peoples. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Aiyana's strength returned gradually, and she proved to be excellent company. She told me stories of her people, their legends, their customs, their deep connection to the land. In return, I told her about my life, my dreams of building something lasting in Montana, my respect for the natural world that had drawn me west. You speak of the land the way my people do, she observed, not as something to be conquered, but as something to be partnered with. I learned early that you can't fight the land and win. You have to work with it, understand it, respect it. This is wisdom. On the second morning, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, brilliant and blinding on the fresh snow, and the wind died to a whisper. Aiyana's clothes had dried completely, and she dressed while I prepared breakfast. I must return to my people, she said as we ate. My grandmother will be worried, and she still needs the medicine. I'll take you back to where I found you. Maybe you can pick up your trail from there. That is kind of you. As we prepared to leave, Aiyana did something that surprised me. She took a small leather pouch from around her neck and pressed it into my hands. This is sacred sage, she said. My grandmother blessed it. It will protect you from harm and bring you good fortune. I can't take something so valuable. You saved my life. This is a small gift in return. I accepted the pouch, touched by the gesture. Thank you. The ride back to where I'd found her took about an hour through the deep snow. When we reached the grove of cottonwoods, Aiyana dismounted and looked around, getting her bearings. My village is about 5 miles that way, she said, pointing northwest. I can find my way from here. Are you sure? I could escort you partway. No, it would not be safe for you to come closer to our village. Some of my people, they do not trust white men. I understood. Will I see you again? Aiyana looked at me with those dark, expressive eyes. The spirits will decide. She started to walk away, then turned back. Tom McKenzie, you have a good heart. Do not let this hard land change that. I watched her disappear into the forest, a graceful figure moving silently through the snow. Only then did I realize that in 2 days, this young woman had touched something deep inside me that I hadn't even known existed. The ride back to my cabin was lonely in a way I'd never experienced before. For 8 years, I'd been content with my solitary life, but now the silence seemed oppressive. I found myself thinking about Aiyana, constantly her laugh, her wisdom, the way she'd looked at me as if she could see into my soul. That evening, as I sat by my fire, I took out the pouch of sacred sage she'd given me. The leather was soft and worn, decorated with tiny beads and patterns I didn't recognize. The sage inside had a clean, sharp scent that somehow made me think of wide-open spaces and ancient wisdom. I had no idea that this simple act of kindness, giving a blanket to a freezing girl, had set in motion events that would change my life forever. I had no idea that even now, Aiyana was telling her grandmother about the white cowboy who had saved her life, or that White Dove was consulting the spirits about what this encounter might mean. And I certainly had no idea that the next day would bring visitors to my ranch who would turn my quiet, solitary world completely upside down. I awoke the next morning to the sound of horses approaching my cabin. This was unusual. I rarely had visitors, especially in winter, and the snow was still too deep for casual travel. I grabbed my rifle and peered out the window, then nearly dropped the weapon in surprise. There were at least 20 Blackfoot warriors, arranged in a semicircle in front of my cabin, all mounted on painted ponies and wearing full traditional regalia. At their head was an elderly man with long gray braids and a face marked by decades of prairie, sun, and wind. Beside him rode Aiyana, looking nervous but determined. My heart started pounding. Had I somehow offended her people by helping her? Were they here for revenge? I'd heard stories of white men who'd been killed for much less. Taking a deep breath, I set my rifle aside, showing weapons would only make things worse, and stepped outside with my hands visible. "Good morning," I called out, hoping my voice sounded calmer than I felt. The elderly man rode forward a few steps. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented but clear. "You are Tom McKenzie." "Yes, sir, I am. I am Chief Running Bear of the Blackfoot Nation. This is my granddaughter, Aiyana Crow Feather." Aiyana gave me a small nod but didn't speak. I typed, "Understand you helped my granddaughter during the storm," Chief Running Bear continued. "Yes, sir. She was nearly frozen. I couldn't just leave her there. You took her to your home. You cared for her. You asked for nothing in return." "That's right." The chief studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to weigh my soul. "Among my people, when a man saves a woman's life, when he shelters her and protects her honor, this creates ... obligations." I wasn't sure where this was going, but I didn't like the sound of it. "Sir, I don't expect anything from your granddaughter or your people. I was just doing what any decent person would do." "Perhaps, but you must understand. Aiyana is not just any woman, she is the granddaughter of our most powerful medicine woman. She is being trained in the sacred ways. Her marriage is a matter of great importance to our tribe." "Marriage?" My mouth went dry. "Chief Running Bear, I think there might be some misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," the chief interrupted. "You have shown great honor in your treatment of Aiyana. You have proven yourself to be a man of good character. The spirits have spoken through White Dove, Aiyana's grandmother. They have declared that you are to be Aiyana's husband." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "I'm sorry." "What?" Aiyana finally spoke up, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Grandfather, perhaps we should explain more slowly. The spirits have spoken," Chief Running Bear declared. White Dove had a vision. She saw a white man with a good heart who would bridge the gap between our peoples. She saw him saving Aiyana from the storm. She saw their children bring in peace between Blackfoot and white settlers. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning. "Chief, with all due respect, I barely know your granddaughter. We spent 2 days together during a storm. That doesn't make us ... I mean, I can't just among my people," the chief said sternly. "When the spirits speak, we listen. White Dove is the most respected medicine woman in our nation. Her visions have guided us for 40 years. She has never been wrong." I looked at Aiyana, hoping for some help, but she seemed as overwhelmed as I was. "Aiyana, what do you think about all this?" She started, then stopped. "I told my grandmother about your kindness, about how you saved my life. She went into a trance and spoke with the spirits. When she awoke, she said the spirits had shown her our future together." "But what do you want?" I pressed. "Not the spirits. Not your grandmother. You." Aiyana looked at her grandfather, then back at me. "I believe in my grandmother's visions, and I thought something when we talked. A connection. But I understand this is strange for you." Strange was an understatement. I was being asked to marry a woman I'd known for 2 days, based on the vision of a medicine woman I'd never met, in front of 20 armed warriors who clearly weren't taking no for an answer. "Chief Running Bear," I said carefully, "I'm honored by this proposal. Truly I am. But in my culture, marriage is something that develops over time. People get to know each other, they court, they fall in love." "Love?" The chief looked puzzled. "Love comes after marriage, not before. Marriage is about duty, about joining families, about serving the greater good of the tribe. But I'm not part of your tribe. You would be, if you married Aiyana. You would become Blackfoot. You would be my grandson, a member of our nation." This was getting more complicated by the minute. "And if I refuse?" The chief's expression darkened. "The spirits have spoken. To refuse would be to insult the sacred visions, to dishonor Aiyana, and to reject the friendship of the Blackfoot Nation." The implied threat was clear. I looked around at the 20 warriors, all of whom were watching me intently. Some had their hands resting casually on their weapons. Could I have some time to think about this?" "The spirits do not wait," Chief Running Bear replied. "But ... He glanced at Aiyana, who gave him a pleading look. "White Dove said you would need time to understand. She said the white man's heart moves differently than the Blackfoot heart. You may have until the next full moon to make your decision." "How long is that?" 12 days. 12 days to decide whether to marry a woman I barely knew and join a tribe whose customs I didn't understand. It seemed impossible. "During this time," the chief continued, "Aiyana will visit you each day. You will learn our ways, and she will learn yours. At the end of 12 days, you will give your answer. And if my answer is no," Chief Running Bear's face was stone, "then you will leave this territory and never return. And the Blackfoot Nation will remember that Tom McKenzie is not a friend to our people." Given that I'd spent 8 years building my ranch and my life in Montana, this wasn't exactly an appealing alternative. "I understand," I said finally. 12 days. The chief nodded. "Aiyana will come tomorrow at sunrise. Treat her with respect, and perhaps you will come to understand what the spirits have planned." With that, he wheeled his horse around and led his warriors away, leaving only Aiyana behind. "I'm sorry," she said as soon as they were out of earshot. I didn't know my grandmother would. I didn't expect this. It's not your fault, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure I meant it. Did you really not know this would happen? I knew grandmother would want to thank you somehow. Among our people, saving someone's life creates a bond. But I thought perhaps she would offer you horses, or furs, or Aiyana shrugged helplessly. I did not expect her to see a vision of marriage. Do you believe in these visions? My grandmother has never been wrong. When I was a child, she had a vision of a great sickness coming to our people. 3 months later, the smallpox came. She saw which families would be affected, which children would survive. She saved many lives with her warnings. So you think the spirits really want us to marry? Aiyana was quiet for a moment. I think the spirits want something, whether it is marriage, or simply friendship between our peoples. I do not know. But I believe my grandmother saw something important. And what do you want? Aiyana, not what the spirits want, not what your grandmother wants. What do you want? She looked at me with those dark, expressive eyes. I want to know you better. These 2 days we spent together, I felt something I have never felt before. You treated me with kindness and respect, even when I was helpless. You asked for nothing in return. This is unusual. Unusual how? The white men I have known before were different. They looked at me as if I were an animal, or a curiosity. You looked at me as if I were a person. You are a person. Yes, but not all white men see this. I understood what she meant. I'd seen how some of the settlers treated the local tribes with suspicion, fear, or outright hostility. It was one of the things about frontier life that had always bothered me. So what happens now? I asked. Now we spend 12 days learning about each other. And at the end, you decide whether you can accept what the spirits have planned. And if I can't, then I will speak to my grandfather. I will ask him to find another way to honor your kindness that does not require you to leave your home. You would do that. You saved my life. I will not let that kindness be repaid with exile. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this remarkable young woman. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. 12 days is not very long to learn a lifetime's worth of customs and beliefs. She was right about that. I suppose we'd better get started then. Aiyana smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since her grandfather's announcement. Yes. And Tom McKenzie. Yes. Try to keep an open mind. My people's ways may seem strange to you, but they have wisdom. And perhaps, perhaps the spirits do know something we do not. After she left, I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. Marriage to a Blackfoot woman. Joining the tribe? It seemed like something out of a dime novel, not real life. But as evening approached and I sat by my fire, I found myself thinking not about the impossibility of the situation, but about Aiyana herself. Her intelligence, her grace, her quiet strength. The way she'd looked at me with trust, even when she was vulnerable and afraid. Maybe the spirits did know something I didn't. Maybe 12 days would be enough to figure out what that was. Or maybe I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The next 12 days were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. True to her word, Aiyana arrived at my cabin each morning at sunrise, and we spent the daylight hours learning about each other's worlds. She taught me about Blackfoot customs and beliefs, how they viewed the relationship between humans and nature, their complex social structures, their spiritual practices. I learned that marriage among her people was indeed about more than just two individuals. It was about joining families, strengthening the tribe, and fulfilling spiritual obligations. Among my people, she explained on the third day as we walked through the snow-covered forest, a woman's marriage affects not just her, but her children, her children's children, and the entire tribe. This is why the spirits must guide such decisions. But what about personal choice? What about love? Love grows from respect, from shared purpose, from walking the same path together. The spirits see further than our hearts can see in a moment of passion. In return, I taught her about my world, about cattle ranching, about the dreams that had brought me west, about the loneliness of frontier life. She was fascinated by my books, having learned to read English from missionaries, and she spent hours examining my maps and journals. You write about the land the way my people speak of it, she observed, reading one of my journal entries about a particularly beautiful sunset over the prairie. With reverence, the land deserves reverence. It gives us everything we need to survive. This is why the spirits chose you, she said quietly. You understand what many white men do not. As the days passed, I found myself looking forward to Aiyana's visits more and more. She was intelligent and curious, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. She could track animals through snow so skillfully, it seemed like magic. And she knew more about plants and their medicinal properties than any doctor I'd ever met. On the 7th day, she brought her grandmother. White Dove was a tiny woman, probably in her 70s, with silver hair braided with feathers and beads. Her eyes were clouded with cataracts, but she seemed to see everything. When Aiyana introduced us, the old woman took my hands in hers and stood silently for a long moment. You have a good spirit, she said finally, in heavily accented English. But you are afraid. Yes, ma'am, I am. Fear is wise when facing the unknown, but do not let fear blind you to possibility. She spent the afternoon at my cabin, and I was amazed by her knowledge. She could predict weather changes by the behavior of birds, identify edible plants buried under snow, and tell stories that seemed to bring the very landscape to life. My granddaughter will be a great healer, she told me as we sat by the fire, but she needs a partner who understands both worlds, the old ways and the new. The spirits showed me that you are this man. What if the spirits are wrong? White Dove smiled. The spirits are never wrong, but sometimes we do not understand their message correctly. That is why you must listen with your heart, not just your mind. On the 10th day, Aiyana and I had our most serious conversation yet. Tom, she said as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, I need to tell you something. If you choose not to marry me, I will not marry anyone. What do you mean? Among my people, when the spirits declare a match, that is the only match. If you refuse, I will remain unmarried for the rest of my life. This hit me like a physical blow. Aiyana, that's not fair. You're young, you're beautiful, you could have any man you wanted. The spirits have spoken. There is no other choice for me, but that's putting all the responsibility on me. What if I'm not the right man for you? What if I can't make you happy? Happiness is not the goal, she said simply. Fulfilling our purpose is the goal, and I believe our purpose is to bridge the gap between our peoples, to show that understanding and respect are possible. And if I can't do that, if I fail, then we will have tried. That is all the spirits ask of us, that we try. The 11th day was the hardest. I spent most of it alone, thinking about everything I'd learned, everything I stood to gain or lose. Marrying Aiyana would mean giving up my independence, joining a culture I barely understood, taking on responsibilities I'd never imagined. But it would also mean gaining a partner who understood me in ways no one ever had, becoming part of a community that valued wisdom and harmony, and possibly helping to create a better future for both our peoples. That evening, Aiyana came to say goodbye before the final day. Whatever you decide tomorrow, she said, I want you to know that these 12 days have been precious to me. You have shown me that there are white men who can be trusted, who can see beyond the color of skin to the spirit beneath. Let me finish, she interrupted gently. If you choose to marry me, I promise to be a good wife. I will learn your ways as you have learned mine. I will help you build something lasting here, and I will never ask you to be anything other than who you are. And if I choose not to marry you, then I will treasure the friendship we have built, and I will pray that the spirits send you the happiness you deserve. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about everything that had happened since that stormy night when I'd found a freezing girl in the forest. How could such a simple act of kindness have led to this impossible choice? But as dawn approached, I realized that maybe it wasn't impossible after all. Maybe the spirits or fate, or simple chance had given me exactly what I needed, even if I hadn't known I needed it. When Aiyana arrived at sunrise on the 12th day, I was waiting for her on my porch. Have you decided? She asked. I have, and I took a deep breath. I've decided that maybe the spirits do know something I don't. I've decided that 12 days with you have been better than 8 years alone. I've decided that if you're willing to take a chance on a stubborn cowboy who doesn't know the first thing about being a Blackfoot husband, then I'm willing to take a chance on whatever the spirits have planned for us. Aiyana's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the sun. You will marry me, I will marry you. If you'll have me. She threw her arms around me, and for the first time since this whole crazy situation began, everything felt right. When I asked, today, my grandfather is waiting with the tribe. We will have a traditional ceremony, and then you will be Blackfoot. Today? But I don't know the customs. The words I will teach you as we go. The most important thing is that you speak from your heart. The ceremony took place in a meadow near the Blackfoot village, with the entire tribe in attendance. I was nervous as hell, but Aiyana stayed by my side, whispering translations and encouragement. Chief Running Bear performed the ritual, speaking in Blackfoot while Aiyana translated. We exchanged vows that were unlike anything I'd ever heard, promises to honor each other's spirits, to walk together on the path the Creator had laid out for us, to bring harmony between our peoples. When it was over, I was no longer just Tom McKenzie, Cowboy. I was Tom McKenzie, member of the Blackfoot Nation, husband of Aiyana Crow Feather, and bridge between two worlds. The celebration lasted until dawn, with dancing, singing, and storytelling that gave me my first real taste of what it meant to be part of a community that valued every member. How do you feel? Aiyana asked as we finally returned to my cabin, our cabin now. Terrified, I admitted, but also, complete. Like I've been missing something my whole life and didn't even know it. The spirits knew, she said, settling into my arms as naturally as if she'd been there forever. They always know. 5 years later, as I write this story, Aiyana and I have built something beautiful together. We have 2 children, a son named Running Wolf, and a daughter named Morning Star, who are growing up fluent in both English and Blackfoot, comfortable in both worlds. Our ranch has become a meeting place between the Blackfoot Nation and white settlers, a place where differences are discussed rather than fought over. Aiyana's healing skills have saved dozens of lives, both native and white, and her wisdom has prevented more conflicts than I can count. I've learned that love doesn't always come in the package you expect. Sometimes it comes in the form of a freezing girl in a snowstorm, a vision from a medicine woman, and a choice that seems impossible until you realize it's the only choice that makes sense. The spirits knew what they were doing when they brought us together. They knew that sometimes the best way to bridge two worlds is to find two people willing to build that bridge together, one day at a time. And they knew that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest acts of kindness, like giving a blanket to someone who needs it more than you do. The end.